Okay, so
Really?
now we've got another theist on the line,
Oh
and
wow,
we're going
zooming
to
through.
attempt. Yeah, we're doing
What is so
good. We're
funny
doing
is
good.
that
Andrew.
before this, Aaron was like, nobody's gonna call in, right? Nobody ever calls in when I'm here. That's what he said beforehand.
So, Andrew, are you there?
Yeah,
Yay, there's Andrew in New Jersey.
You got a lot of background noise there, Andrew.
yeah, I'm going to a place where it's not too much noise. Is it good?
It's a little better.
Yeah, go ahead. What's your question?
Yeah. I think because I'm a theist. I think the Old Testament and I think it has in the New Testament. I think there are two lords in the Bible.
They're two what?
Lords.
Lords.
Lords. Okay.
Yeah. So you have the Old Testament God. He seems to contradict Jesus a lot.
Yes, he does.
And yeah, and I think I think a lot of Christians, including myself at one point, we were serving the wrong God. I think the correct God is what Jesus talks about, which is because you know how Jesus, he only did miracles and he only did good works, and he wasn't like the Old Testament Lord. He wasn't like a genocidal, psychopathic lunatic. Even people of his time chastised him for worshiping, for having like a different God. The Jews at the time, they always criticized Jesus, and Jesus would always tell them, "Your father is not my father." Things like that. It's something that I, thought I should have done.
Yeah. I mean, in context for the New Testament, the interpretation could be that the Pharisees, especially at the time, had gone so far astray from the original form of the faith that the idea of Jesus as this reformer is just to bring it back to what it was meant to be. Although, I do have to ask, are you a Marcionite?
Who?
Are you a Marcionite? Do you know what Marcionism is?
Is that like a Pokemon? I don't know what is that.
That is funny, but no, it's not a Pokemon. No, so Marcion of Sinope was the 2nd century heretic. They deemed him a heretic, and his argument was essentially that we don't actually have his works; we only have the works of his opponents. But his arguments were essentially, look how different these two gods are. Surely they're not the same one, and that. This is not a brand new kind of idea. Christians since the 2nd century have thought that, at least some, right? They were often spoken against, right? They were often demonized. But by the way, Marcion of Sinope is actually the first guy that actually had a New Testament canon at all, which I think is interesting. But the thing is, a lot of it relies on cherry picking verses anyways. So you can pick out some good stuff in the Old Testament. There's some good stuff in Proverbs, and even in the Psalms, there's some good stuff. But then you could also pick out some bad stuff in the New Testament, especially Revelation, where Christ brings a sword, where a third of the world is going to get destroyed. So a lot of it does rely on cherry picking verses. But you wouldn't be, you're not so far off though, because if you just look at, kind of the overall picture of the Old Testament God versus the New Testament God, the New Testament God seems a lot nicer than the Old Testament one. So I totally understand your point of view here.
Well, I think when it comes to Revelation, I don't even think Revelation is canon. I think Revelation was added in. Usually when I tell people, like, if they want to get into the Bible, to stick to, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and First Corinthians, or Galatians, or whatever, because Revelation, if you read the New Testament of what Jesus says, and then when you get to the Revelation, Jesus turns into a psychopathic warlord all over again. And I think that was added in for political reasons. From the research that I've come across. So
yeah,
I
it's
think,
not so far off. It was. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Even there were times like in the Old Testament where I remember I brought this up before, where God tells, I think it's Daniel or Isaiah to go and number the children of Israel, and then in another book it tells him that Satan told him to go and number the people of Israel. So
Yeah, you're
I
thinking of
think the
David.
God of the Old Testament, huh?
You're thinking of David's census.
Yeah, David. It was David. Yeah. And then in
Yep.
another verse, it says how Satan told David to go number the people of Israel. So I think the God of the Old Testament, and then Old Testament God sent lion spirits and stuff. So I think the Old Testament God was I think the serpent or what they call Beelzebub or whatever it's called. It's I don't know.
Okay, so from what's sounding like, you would agree more with the Gnostics then, at least some version of the Gnostics.
Yeah, I think yeah.
Yeah. So the thing about Satan, right? It doesn't say like Satan as in a name. It says because it wasn't
An
a
adversary.
title there. Yeah, exactly. It means the adversary. So it could just mean enemy, like an earthly enemy. I think Satan as adversary, just meaning adversary, pops up even in the Balaam story. Balaam and his donkey, his talking donkey. That definitely totally happened. So I totally get where you're coming from, right? But you also have to remember that that ideas of God change over time, all the time, right? Because I'm sure there are plenty of points of theology in the Old Testament that you can say are totally different in the New Testament. And what you were saying about Revelation, it's kind of accurate, right? Because Revelation took a while to get accepted universally. It wasn't universally accepted right away. In some of our earliest canon lists, it's not there. And in others it is. So there was debate around it, just to be clear. And I would have to specifically look back into the debate around Revelation for specific views, but I don't think you're the only one who has that kind of feeling, because they do come off as very different God concepts. But it is important to remember that even if you are someone who does accept Revelation, you could still fit that into the God concept of the Old Testament. Because in the Old Testament, of course, God destroys everything with water, and he says he's never going to do that again. But there are other parts if you keep reading through the Old Testament, that they do talk about the next. What word could I put on it? The next destruction of the world would be with fire, and the imagery's there. I should say that the imagery's there. And then, of course, we get to Revelation. So the author of Revelation, people who accepted Revelation, also would have viewed this as an extension of that deity. But I completely understand your point of view.
Yeah. Like I don't want to. I know you got to get on to some other calls, but another thing I wanted to say was if you notice how I think when Jesus was in the city, after the city turned against him, and his disciples was like, should you call down fire from heaven, like the past prophets did? And Jesus tells them to be silent, for you do not know the manner of spirit which you have called. So I think when Jesus was doing all the the healing, all the healing the blind, curing the sick and stuff, when Jesus says, I only come to bring life and life more abundantly, I think that is the true Father of what they call the loving Father or whatever. And the Old Testament was a more like a dark God, more like an evil God. That's just my personal belief. I know the Gnostics weren't that popular, but
yeah, they weren't that popular.
Right.
Although I think you get a kick out of reading about Marcion. Let's just put it that way. I'm a big Marcion fan over here, so I totally get it.
You were right about God contradicting Jesus often, though. I mean, if you look at Isaiah 45, God declares that he brings good and evil, that it's just him alone. There is no
Yeah.
Jesus, there is
Yep.
no Satan,
Yep.
it's just him, and there is no one else.
Yep.
And where Jesus says
Yep.
eventually that he sits on God's right-hand side, God says there's nobody sits by my side.
Yep.
Yeah, there
Yeah.
are
Yep.
some. So I could argue with like the truth of this, but I feel like that's just a longer conversation. However, have you ever read the Gnostic work, The Creation of the World?
With the it has something to do with the demiurge and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I've read a little. I'm not too well informed on that, but I read little things here and there. About the demiurge, Sophia, and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm not too educated on it. I just know bits and pieces.
Yeah, I feel like you'd kind of fit in that camp, which is very interesting. It's really rare to run into a Gnostic or a Marcionite or anything like that. I'm always pleasantly surprised when that happens, because it's just such a
Yeah, it also talks about.
It's so different from what you normally run into.
Yeah. Even God even had a wife named Asherah, and that wife was demonized by the ancient Israelites. Asherah is really the wife of the Lord, right. Or not the Lord, what they call God Most High. Yeah. The Lord is Yahweh. Yeah, he's the Lord your God. Like when it says in the Bible, because sometimes the Most High, what I call the good God, is talking, and then sometimes it says the Lord your God, and that's the evil God that's talking. So it's kind of confusing.
I mean, there are definitely sections that talk about, even under your view, the Most High referring to the evil one, the evil God, because I think it's in Deuteronomy 32. There's the very long poem, and it does talk about El Elyon, God Most High. That he's very clearly talking about the Old Testament God, not some good one. And then they use the same phrasing of "This is your God."
It seems like they stitched together.
I mean, there's a lot of stuff behind Deuteronomy 32, especially 8 through 9. That I'm not going to get into the arguments too much here. A lot of work has been done on it, and it's very interesting. But I think that some of the questions, like on how these things came together, I would agree that there's been definitely a lot of stitching together, you could call it, of different God concepts, but they all would have been essentially based on the same God concept if we look back far enough. At least the ones in the Bible, they have a root in that. Now, of course, even that God that you could tie it all back to has a root in some other gods, but that's something else. That's something different.
Yeah, well, they all fall under the Canaanite entities. Like I know the ancient Israelites, they worship the Most High under the Israelites worship the Most High under the Canaanites. But yeah, it also talks about God having like 70 sons or something. You ever heard of that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's 7 and yeah. But that's basically about it. I just wanted to know if y'all knew about that.
Right, yeah. I'm very deep into it.
Thank you very much for that. And surprisingly, we have another theist lined up. So, Andrew, thank you very much for your question.
Andrew.
Thank you.
Thank you.